you need to know as an individual what constitutes freedom for you, like freedom, fun, energy-giving activity. And typically there'll be smaller things that we might do on a daily or weekly basis. And then you just need to decide when you have that freedom, what are you going to do, where are you going to do it, and who with. Welcome to the Scale My Clinic podcast. I'm Sachin, co-founder of Scale My Clinic, here to help general practice owners build thriving, profitable and efficient clinics. Together with Todd, we bring you actionable strategies, inspiring success stories and expert insights to transform your practice. Let's dive into today's episode and take the next step to improving your practice.
Welcome back. And in this episode, Sachin, we're going to get to talking about the three big mistakes that owners make this time of year. And by this time of year, I mean end of the year, kind of coming into the early part of the following year. And the three things that you and I chatted about were, number one, calling off the hunt too early. Number two, not preloading the next year. And number three, not showing enough love to the team. Let's get you to talk to point number one there for me, if you could.
Yeah, three common mistakes made by 90+% of owners every year. And so if we think about calling off the hunt too soon, there's probably three bits that's made up of. First of all, we forget about team training. And so our team is, and when I say team, I mean the employed team, just to be clear. And I'm talking about the majority setting, which is us as a service entity supplying services and facilities to GPs. And so because we forget team training or we drop the ball on that, often the problem is that the team don't actually fully understand how the business operates. And so I think for me, that is one of the key things not to drop the ball on, because we forget who our customers are. And I think widely accepted now that GPs are the prime customers of a general practice, of a clinic, and patients are also customers, but the GP comes first, because without a GP, you can't generate revenue to service or capacity to service the patient. So that's probably the first one. And so if you're on our mailing list, you will receive a little gift on that. And if you're not, then in the show notes, I'm sure you'll be able to get onto that.
If you're not, then bad luck. Suck it up.
Number two is we fail to sort of pre-fill our books. We sort of wait until often halfway through January or beyond to fill the books with high-value patients. Now, obviously, if capacity is an issue, people are away or whatever, then you need to be mindful of that. But most of the time, my understanding is, from what I've seen, is that, yes, people are away, but there's plenty of capacity as well in the January, February time. And so we really want to pre-fill our books early in that situation. And so, Todd, we've created weekly patient machine that our members get, that they can copy, paste and send. But if you can't do that and you don't have access to that, then the best thing to do is BAFA or BAMFAM, book an appointment from an appointment. Just make sure. It's just like the dentist. I joke about this, but I don't think it's that much of a joke. Dentists, when you go there, there's two things that happen. One is you can't leave without your next appointment. Very hard. They sort of lock the door and barricade the door till you've got that next appointment, which is a good habit, by the way. Otherwise you wouldn't book it. And then the other is that they empty your wallet. They're the two things. There's no money left in your wallet, and that is replaced with an appointment. And so I think we need to learn from the dentists. The money, I'll let you decide about that, but definitely the appointments, make sure that your doors are barricaded. And dentists are really good at presumptive. They're really good at that presumptive, hey, I've booked your next appointment for this date. Here you go. And then if it doesn't suit, we'll change it, but it's booked. So that's number two. And then number three, we think it's the time that no one's interested in looking at anything in terms of ads, or maybe we're just tired as owners, managers, etc. of a practice, and we can't be bothered to recruit, or we think it's just not worth it, or we make a lame-ass effort, one or the other. And the reality is it's prime time. People are making New Year's resolutions that they're never going to keep at this time of year. And one of those is I'm going to find a different place to work, or, I'm going to change my life. Sometimes just really unrealistic decisions, but you've got that mindset in the marketplace. And so you can capture that. And maybe I'll be a bit rude here, Todd. One of my favorites here is a place to go hunting is just find your local corporates and go hunting. All right, make some relationships with some of the GPs there and go hunting there. Prime place to start looking.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like retail businesses in that, a large portion of the annual turnover comes from a small number of months. And I think recruiting is a lot like that. If you're ignoring recruiting at this time of year, you're probably missing out on more than half of the opportunity coming in the next 3 months. And so making sure that you're putting the effort in. And because most people are lazy and go away and turn things off, what it means is you cut through all that noise as well. And again, it's not difficult to cut through the noise when you know the right way to do it. All you need to do is go and read all of the ads and do something completely different to all of those shitty ads that get trotted out week in, week out that never, ever get a bite. It'd be like being a fisher person and sticking a bait on a hook and just leaving it there for a week and not worrying about any fish nibbling on the hot. That just don't change anything. So it's actually a relatively easy place when you know what to do to succeed, I think. So that's a great piece of advice.
Absolutely. The ads, yeah, you need to be a bit creative with those. There's probably 12 levers in total to pull. We don't have the time to cover all of those in this episode. Maybe in a future episode, we'll cover some of those levers bit by bit. But the key is to take action and not ignore this time. It's prime time. So I suppose next we should talk about the next mistake. And the next mistake is failing to preload the following year. And so this is a really interesting one, Todd, because what happens when we talk about preloading a year, we're really talking about some advanced planning of the year. And you hear all sorts of bullshit, frankly. Like, you'll hear things like, I don't want to plan my year. I feel too constricted. I feel I've got too many things in my life to be able to plan it. And yes, that might be true. But equally, there are some pretty successful people who do probably a lot more than each of us in terms of their achievements, and we can probably borrow from some of their habits. And so I think there's 3 probably key areas we need to be thinking about here. And what I would say is it's okay to be constricted or feel constricted if it's, going too deep is too much. But what I would still invite people to do is just take some of what we're talking about here and implement that. And so there's 2 big things I would say that if you don't do anything else, then I would definitely implement these, because there's probably very little argument about these 2. There will be people who argue anyway. They can be people who may be a bit cantankerous like me or yourself, Todd. And so, always looking for an argument.
Hey, listeners, are you a general practice owner wanting more profit, more time freedom, and a dream team to help you get there? At Scalmo Clinic, we've got just the solution. Visit scalmoclinic.com and click Book a Practice Growth Call to talk to one of our practice growth consultants and receive a practice growth plan where we'll walk you through a personalized plan, the tools and help you'll need to deliver on the practice of your dreams. Whether you're looking to improve your existing practice or you're just about to open your first clinic, we're here to help. That's scalmoclinic.com, where you'll find the purple button to book a practice growth call. It's free and takes around 20 to 30 minutes. We don't work with corporates or not-for-profits. We're only for privately held general practices in Australia. See you there.
First of all, we need to be clear on what are our money-making priorities. What are the 1, 2, or 3 activities that we do that are really quite unique to us as an individual in our role? And really, if we don't do them, then revenue is going to drop or fail to increase. And, some examples of things like that, there might be recruitment, like we just talked about. That might be a key activity for you as an owner or a manager. Then it might be that the owner is deep in retention, GP retention, having those conversations and coaching the GPs in their practice, perhaps. There may be other activities. For example, if you're in a niche or specialized practice, you might take referrals from other general practices and then be actually in the process of trying to, market and get more referrals for your niche service. And so there may be presentations or content that you have to create to achieve that. Similarly, you may be marketing your own practice, either to patients or GPs. You might need to create some time to create content that you need to then use to do recruiting of patients or GPs, but you just need to think about what are those 1, 2, or 3 key activities. It might be culture. That's another example. So plenty of different examples, but it's most important that you do that. And then the second part on the back of that is it's not, is it all work and no play makes Jim a boring person or whatever? So the second part is you need to know as an individual what constitutes freedom for you, like freedom, fun, energy giving activity. And so, and typically there'll be smaller things that we might do on a daily or weekly basis. Normally weekly, like you may want a 4-day week, for example. And so you may choose 1 day a week, you're going to be off, and that's your weekly freedom. And then you just need to decide when you have that freedom, what are you going to do, where are you going to do it, and who with. And you do a similar exercise for things you want to do monthly. Right. And so recently we were mapping out 2025 with our members in Project X. And, one of the bits that stood out for me was one of our members talked about, this year I'm going to spend every month, I'm going to set aside one weekend where I go away with my now 18-year-old because they are now about to start uni. And that was quite beautiful. But what's even more poignant is that person said, because I didn't realize how fast the last X number of years have gone. And I think they were intimating I missed a bit of time there. And, what they're really saying is, I wish I'd done this exercise 10 years ago, because then with that hindsight, I would have done things maybe a little bit differently. And so I think, monthly as well, just being clear on what the freedom activity, who with and where is really important. And then, quarterly and yearly, for me, it's school holidays, where I want to go, maybe away from my children. I don't know. But, there'll be some activity that, if you put it in first, it's just much more likely to happen. And so in this situation, we talk about the borrow from Stephen Covey, the big rocks, the pebbles, the sand. You know the story, Todd? Maybe share it with us about rocks, pebbles, sand.
I do. It's about the container. The metaphor is that the jar or the container is your life and all of the space that your life contains. And so the question is, what's the right order? The sand being the bits and pieces that are part of business as usual, life as usual, and the pebbles being the smaller projects and the smaller things in life that are still important, and the rocks being the most important things. And there's a variety of ways of putting them in. And what most people do is put the sand in first, of course, and then try and put the pebbles in, and then in the remaining space, try and fit in the rocks. The problem then is that you actually don't get to fit in all of the rocks. And I've heard a kind of a take on this, which is that, the other way of thinking of this is that they're balls. All of these important things are balls, and they're made of slightly different substances. Some of them are rubber and you can drop and they'll bounce back, but other ones are glass. And if you drop them, they don't bounce back. And so, that's things like relationships, even self-care in there, Sachin, we talked a bit about blocking time for relationships and important meetings, be they anniversaries or birthdays. I'm calling them meetings, but I'm just meaning things in the diary. And the reality is that it might be that some of it is just time for you to be by yourself. It might be that some of it's time for you to go and do whatever physical activity is your jam, just things that you can pre-commit to. And then, my theory, you talked a bit earlier about the resistance people often have to this. I have a theory that probably relates to, I'm going to use the word trauma, just the fact that they've kind of had these ideas before, they haven't worked out, other people have taken control of their time, and they've kind of been on the receiving end of things. So what they're really saying is, I don't want to build my hopes up, because then they'll be dashed and I'll be pissed off, and then I'll just go back to being reactive because that's best. But I think what we're saying here is, why don't you get it out of your head? At least then it's down on paper. It's actually locked down somewhere, and you can always edit it. You can always backfill something if you decide that something else became a priority. But if you don't prioritize these things in your life, somebody else will. And most likely they're not going to be the things that you want when somebody else is up to the rostering. It's going to be what they want. And that's the frustrating thing. You don't want a business that owns you. You want to own the business.
Absolutely, yeah. Intentionality is super important. So once you've done that, and obviously, Todd, we're condensing 90-minute process down to 5 minutes. So, once you've identified what your money-making rocks are, what your freedom rocks are, and then, your pebbles, your sand, your personal and professional sand, then the next job, the third part of this, is to then, in your calendar for 2025, probably in draft form first, I would say. Really map that all out, check for clashes, obviously cross-check it with your significant others at work and outside. Stress test it, make sure, 2 things. Number one, if I do these things, have I got a higher chance of getting the results that I want to get? And then number 2, if that's the case, is it sustainable? Will I or someone else break if I do these things? And if, there's a potential of breakages, then you might need to go back and recut it. What we might do in the show notes is probably just give a template for 2025 if someone wants it. I think that's something we can just pop in there, just a blank one. So viewers or listeners can have that. That's useful. And then start filling it out. And then round to the third mistake. The third big mistake is that it's easy to forget to show love to our existing people at this time of year. And that shows up in 3 different ways. Number 1, retention of key staff. People need to know and feel that they are valued. And when I say staff, I'm talking about in this current climate, I'm talking about employed team members. Our employees need to know they're valued and feel that they're valued. And we need to be intentional about how we go about that. The way we show gratitude, whether it's verbally, written, gifts, celebrations, whatever it is, your people best, but it needs to happen. Alarmingly, Todd, I've read in quite a few different online fora lately of many practices have abandoned sort of celebrations at this time of year or any time of year. And you're getting sort of managers who are asking, is it okay for me to take my team out and pay for it because the practice isn't doing it? I think that's a real false economy, failing to celebrate in that way. You might be saving pennies from where I come from, cents obviously here. You may be saving a few cents or dollars, but the return on lack of investment will be large in terms of people leaving. People feel that.
100%.
So that's retaining key staff. Then when it comes to patients, I think in the current climate, we've talked about it and we will be talking about it in other episodes, but there's a real climate now of general practice sort of and our, traditional work being swooped upon by the vultures, the Foctors, Noctors, any Octa sort of purporting to have the same expertise as general practice and, with a bit of political expediency behind it. And so we got to get really good at the way we think about retaining our patients. We might not want to retain all patients, that's okay. But the right patients and the right avatars for our practice, we really need to be really strategic in the way we communicate and have a real clear plan about how we retain those patients. And then, of course, we talked earlier, mistake 1, about calling off the hunt too soon and that this is prime time to look for GPs. Well, if it's the prime time to look for GPs, guess what? It's the prime time to potentially lose GPs. And so I think this is a time of year where we really need to be thinking about how we've worked in partnership with the GPs to help make sure they know we're on their side together. You get these sort of banal conversations, can I have a 25% service fee or 20% service fee or whatever, and there's this frankly ridiculous conversations going on in places where people think that is sustainable in general practice. People who have no idea about ownership.
Yeah, it's not the real conversation to be having, is it?
Absolutely. The process you've built, our members can walk through with GPs. What I'm most proud of this year, Todd, one of my favorite 2024-25 achievements is that, we've been able to partner around that process with the college on CPD, which now means that people who implement that process, which completely obliterates the percentage conversation, it helps GPs' well-being, their own role sustainability as well as financial sustainability. We've found that way to merge that with the practice interests and CPD, which aligns everyone. And what I love about that, Todd, is that, we know in general practice that the reality is that better continuity leads to better health outcomes. So GP retention improves continuity. And so there's no better way that, really from a general practice point of view than retaining the right GPs to serve the patient base. So it's sort of a win-win-win for patient, doctor and practice if we can nail retention of GPs. So that's really cool that we've been able to do that. Yeah, so they're probably the 3 big mistakes and the sort of 9 mini pieces that make up that jigsaw, the mosaic of mistakes, let's call it.
That'll give people a fair bit of work to get to. So listening in, probably the key thing with this session is just to pick one thing to actually get to working on to completion, really, because all of those areas we talked about are actually a fairly large area when you break it down to what are the actions, what do I need to commit to. And if you're picking one of those 3 that you thought, okay, to make this coming year, whenever you're listening to this, the next 12 months better, where would you start with those 3 things?
Ooh. That's a hard one. You're going to ask that as well when you're saying it. All right, there's a toss-up for me, which is between retention and mapping out the year. It's tempting to go to recruitment. However, if you can't retain, then you're sort of filling a leaky bucket. So investment bankers are pretty good about this, right? They're like, don't lose money. Whether you make more money, don't worry about that. Just don't lose. So
Don't lose
I think,
GPs.
yeah, that's a real threat at this time of year. And if you don't have as a practice a really clear process around how you think about retaining your GPs, then I think that's a massive risk. And so I think for me, it's a toss up between that. And then I think I'm not going to go with that though. I'm going to go with mapping out your next year. And the reason is that if you don't schedule or go about the way you work in a different way, it's very unlikely the results will change. And so, because there's no overarching strategic thought, there's just, I'm doing this activity and now I'm doing that activity. Whereas if you've intentionally designed what you're doing, and I think, I don't want to dishearten people, it doesn't happen overnight, right? All we're looking for is sequential improvement over time. So you just want to make next year or the year after better than the one that preceded it. And if we can do that consistently over time, then guess what? Those small improvements over time lead to massive results at the end. And so I think the most important thing is have a stab at mapping out your year and then just run with it and then do it again next year and just do it bit by bit. So that's my thinking, Todd. What's yours?
Yeah, I think it's the preloaded year. And I think it doesn't matter when you listen to this. If it happens to be end of year, start of year, and it kind of neatly fits in with a calendar year, great. But if you're listening to it mid-year, it doesn't matter. Getting to planning the year in advance. The thing I like about that, as you said, is the hygiene. So as well as planning things, when you're putting things in, your brain should be thinking, what should I be editing? What should I be removing that no longer fills my bucket or is something that I've outgrown? It could be a lot of things that you're doing that are not a really great use of your time now. And there's great maturity in just editing and saying no to things in advance. So you just say, hey, listen, I've been on this committee or I've done this particular thing for this amount of time. You know, good luck. I'm not going to be doing that in the next year, whatever that might be. You've got to clear out some space for the stuff. So it's a little bit like getting some new furniture for your home or whatever. You've got to clear out the old stuff before you can put the new stuff in. So I like the hygiene of sitting down, doing some patient work on how the next year will be, or at least how you would like it to be, the first cut. And then the habit of calibrating that decision with the people in your world. And you've got to declare, once you declare how you want your next year to be, you must share it widely. So everybody else is aligned in supporting you in doing those things. And so I really like that. For me, that's the number one thing to get to work on. And then those other things, they all have high priorities, but we don't want to be Kevin Rudd in 07 with 9 number one priorities, or we're just going to achieve 0. So wherever you are in the year, if you haven't done this work, get to planning your year in advance, get to editing out the stuff that frankly is shit and you shouldn't be doing anymore anyway. And if you're not sure about something going or staying, I'm going to say make it go. Just be a really aggressive mofo about this and just go, you know what, if I'm unsure, it's a hell yes or it's a no. And then you're going to free up some space. Sure, you might piss a few people off, but you can just blame Sachin for that.
Absolutely. And just one correction. It's not about don't be Kevin Rudd in 07. Just don't be Kevin Rudd.
Talk about yourself from the third person. On that note, we might land this plate and let people get to not being Kevin Rudd and getting to those 9 activities, but maybe starting with just planning your preloaded year whenever that begins. See you in the next episode.
Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Scale My Clinic podcast. I hope today's episode gave you valuable insights and practical steps to take your clinic to the next level. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to share it with other general practice owners who benefit from improving their practices too. Looking for more tools, resources and updates? Why not follow us on Facebook at Scale My Clinic to stay connected, to join the conversation with like-minded practice owners. Let's keep working together to scale your clinic and build something truly impactful. See you next time.